our demographic kind of overview. So grab my notes here. My desk looks like a bomb's hit it. There's stuff all over the place. I'm trying to get ready and have it at my disposal today. Hope yours don't look like this tomorrow when you're getting ready for the exam. But Kimber asked, can the demographic transition model be connected to things like globalization? Well, first of all, I want to start by saying demographic transition model, demography, if it were me, I would find a way to put the demographic transition model front and center on this exam in one of the two FRQs. I would. Okay. I might do it in a chart. I might do it with several countries in a chart, their birth rates, their death rates, their natural increase, their dependency ratios, their doubling times. Notice all these terms, concepts, their fertility rates, infant mortality rates, youth dependency, elderly dependency. We need to be comfortable with those. If you want a little kind of, note sheet of what all those are just to be safe, that's fine, but just do it in a condensed note card, maybe kind of version. But I think it would be a great way to measure people's knowledge is to use demographic transition, put some countries' numbers up there and say, okay, what's going on in this country? Not just what stages it's in, because you could probably look that up, but why is it in this stage? What's led to the birth rates being here? What led to the natural increase being here? And then more importantly, connecting it to the future. What social issues could this country face because of these numbers? What economic issues could this country face? Explain the cultural challenges that this part of this country may face if these were the circumstances. So I think the demographic transition model is a top 5 choice for a focus of an FRQ. If I had to rate top 5 choices for an FRQ, demographic transition model, at least as part of it, would easily be in my top 5. Okay, von Thunen would probably be in my top 5 as well as stuff that we've kind of mentioned so far today. Could it be connected to globalization? Yeah, it absolutely. To answer Kimber's question, it can be, because countries that are more developed and therefore their natural increase rates are relatively low, maybe even negative if they're stage 5, then those countries are more likely to be more globalized. So they're going to have more trading partners. They're going to have more pop culture. They're going to have less folk culture. They're going to have probably more immigration from other places, okay? Because people are wanting to come there to get a higher education, to get better jobs, to have opportunities. So globalization absolutely makes connections, but then also folk culture and the anti kind of globalization is connected to your early stages, particularly your 2s. You might remember that stage 2 and stage 3, or I should say stage 3. Stage 3 is often where you see conflicts related to pop and folk culture, one clashing with the other. India's had so many examples of that. Gender issues. You've got a lot of FRQ practice on gender issues. India, the rural areas, there's still a lot of cultural norms about what women can't do or shouldn't do, or things that are taboos. But in the cities, a lot of those things are being removed. All those barriers, a lot of those cultural ideas are being overcome. All right. So yeah, and Kimber went on to mention technology diffusing across the world. So where technology diffuses as you move up in the demographic transition model, then those places become more connected. And the ones that are not as developed are typically less connected. Now, I want to go back to something that showed up on FRQ that a few of you have even done recently. It was an optional demographic transition model FRQ. If they ask you to explain a model, if they ask you to explain a theory, please do not be too short, because explain means the why and the how, and it means basically you need to give an example if you can. So we cannot just say the demographic transition model is a model that shows birth rate, death rates, and natural increases in a country. That's not good, okay? Demographic transition model is a model that shows those 3 things, and that's fine to say that, but that's incomplete, so we got to complete the loop. The demographic transition model is a model that shows birth rates, death rates, and natural increase rates as countries evolve or change through history or through time. And so as they encounter different moments through time, it attempts to predict what's going to happen to the natural increase rate via your birth rates and death rates, which then puts countries into categories of 1, 2, 3, 4, or now even possibly 5. Okay? That's what a good explanation of the demographic, or description even. With description, you would want to give a little more detailed examples and maybe say, for example, the country of blank is in stage 2 because this is what's going on. If it was a description, the country of Sweden is in stage 4 because this is what's going on. That's the kind of stuff you want to focus on. You might have a chart, and then you might have population pyramids. If it's not top 5, I would put population pyramids at the top 10 possibility, definitely. Put 2 population pyramids on there of 2 different places in the world or 2 different places in one country. Analyze the differences. Look at the dependency. Look at the elderly. Look at the youth. Look at the gender differences possibly, if there is any. Look at baby booms. Look for baby bust. Baby bust are when there's not a lot of kids being born. Consider what consequences economically, socially, politically come with that. Be able to look at a population pyramid and say that country needs immigrants. Be able to look at one and say that country's losing people, immigrants. They're leaving the country. That's a country that gets remittances, money sent back home from immigrants, and a lot of it. Look at a population pyramid and say that country needs a lot of retirement homes. Look at a population pyramid and say that country needs a lot of nurseries for kids, need a lot of schools. Look at a population pyramid and be able to say that country has a high education rate of women, or the opposite. But you've also got to be able to reason by looking at those pyramids. We obviously have to know the shapes, but you can have a little cheat sheet on that on your right beside of you. Hey, a 2 looks like this, 3's like this, 4's like this. That's easy at this point. But why does it look like that, and how does it impact the future? What population pyramid would promote an anti-natalist policy? What population pyramid would promote a natalist policy? Wanting people to have kids and not, and be able to explain or describe. Describe what an anti-natalist policy might look like. Describe what a natalist policy, pro-natalist, might look like. That means use an example, okay? That means talk about the process of a country would be maybe lacking people in the young ages, and therefore they're going to maybe put a new program in place that takes away taxes from people who have more than so many kids. They try to promote it, allow them access to the best schools if they have more than 3 kids or something like that. But in a description, you have to go through the process of how those policies would work. Notice how many things come into play here. We could also say, look at that pyramid, and what would Malthus say about it? Like if Malthus looked at a stage 2 country, he would say, look out. Or what would neo-Malthusians even say? And what would neo-Malthusians say about the fact technocrats might say, well, yeah, but we're coming up with better agriculture and we're irrigating and we're becoming more technology savvy. But neo-Malthusians might say, but what are you doing to become more technology savvy? Are you overusing the land? Are you polluting the land? Are you doing sustainable practices of agriculture? Notice we're crossing over again here, right? So there are so many things connected to DTM and population pyramids. We could go on and on and on and on. And we could bring in Ravenstein and Zelensky, which is next on my list. And how do they connect to them? And Ravenstein's laws. You could have Ravenstein's laws right there to look at. Good idea. I'd probably do that. You could have Zelensky's, the outline of, remember Zelensky took demographic transition. Ravenstein's the one who came up with the laws of why people move, where they move and why they move. Short locations that they're familiar with. Why? Culture. Most of the time, culture. They want to be closer to people. They're familiar with their culture and how they do things. If you move a long distance, you move to big cities. Gravity model. Hierarchical diffusion. For every flow, there's a counterflow. I'm just mentioning a few. If I go through all these, we'll be on this one until the next time to start at 4 o'clock. But you get the picture. You can have those beside your desk. All right. Zelensky took the model. We talked about this in one the other day and compared it and put in place what happens to migration. Not only international, but internal or domestic. You got to know the difference in those. Domestic means inside. Internal means inside. Domestic migration is somebody moving from Texas to Tennessee. That's not immigration. Immigration is somebody moving from Costa Rica to Tennessee or the U.S., okay? And then with all of these, know your push and pull factors. Back to Zelensky. I didn't mean to go too fast. I just know we talked about that. Zelensky in every stage, particularly when you get to 2, it's real important. 2, 3, 4, what would be happening urban? When's urban growth at its highest? He says toward the end of stage 2, urbanization, but it continues some in 3, but then suburbanization picks up. In stage 2, you're getting immigrants coming in. In stage 3, you're getting immigrants starting to go out. Stage 2, I think I said all that wrong. Stage 2, you're getting immigrants leave your country. Stage 3, you begin getting immigrants coming in. By stage 4 and 5, what immigrants you have are coming into the country mostly, right? And probably coming from stage 2s and 3s, that relationship of what's going on, right? So Zelensky and Ravenstein, very important guys related to population as well. We'll take a look at Kimber's question over here, and then we'll just, actually, I've already got about halfway through my list, but there's so many things connected to it. Would the countries that are more developed suffer more from something like an economic crash? If it is a global crash, which today, most of the time it would be, then it will most immediately, yes, impact the countries that are more developed because they have more connections. It usually will trickle down to other places, hierarchical diffusion. But generally speaking, yes, that is correct. It would impact the places more developed probably the most as far as total value, but that's tricky too. If it trickles down to the less developed areas, and catch this point, and those less developed areas are making t-shirts that are being sold in the United States, or they're mining in or working in an oil refinery, and because the United States and China and Japan is not buying and selling as much stuff anymore, then those people get laid off. Now, in a global economy, tell me who's hurting worse. The rich country might have lost more money, but who might be on the verge of losing their home or even not having food to eat? So it's a tricky question, Kimber. At first, and mostly, I would say yes, the more developed countries suffer the heaviest casualty as far as economic numbers. But at the end of the day, it usually trickles down to those people who don't have much else. And so if they lose something, if they lose a job, it's dire circumstances, if that makes sense. Right? And yes, absolutely. Great point. Kimber makes a tremendous point. Everybody catch that. That connects to scale of analysis. See, if we looked at the global scale, we would probably start by focusing a lot on hierarchical stuff, big cities, New York, London, Tokyo, major markets, places like that, and say, oh, this company had to lay off this many workers, this company had to lay off this many workers. But then if we zoomed into Bangladesh and we looked at a clothing factory that normally employs 5,000 people, and this really happened here a few months ago, and they had to lay off 2/3 of those people. Now, at a scale of analysis, take a camera and go home with those people that got laid off in Bangladesh. They're not as connected to the world as people in New York City in some way, in many ways, but they are connected. And that connection is fragile when there's a crash like that, right? And another part of the question Kimber asked earlier, these lower ranked countries or these lower developed countries, less developed, they also do not have as many avenues to support people when a crash like this happens. They don't have the means to have extra funding. Most of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, they can't afford to send a naval ship to house possibly extra COVID-19 patients like the U.S. did. Although fortunately, we didn't really need those. They don't have that access to do those kind of things in most of those places, okay? So that's a great connection point Kimber made to scales of analysis. So as we look at connections, you might not be asked about modern day economics, but you might be asked about the trend of agriculture these days. You might be asked about the trend of culture and how does that impact at different scales? You say, well, I don't know what you mean. Well, if a major corporation that produces commercial farming products goes out of business, that means their suppliers, supply chain, that they're getting cash crops from that might be in less developed countries have to find new people to sell to. And as Krista brings in, that brings us back to a connection of political geography and this modern day global economy that we have set up, which has a lot of connections to colonialism. Because if you look at who the developed and who the less developed are, your colonizing countries, are your more developed, and your most recently colonized are less developed. And let me bring us full circle here to something else. What if they ask you to explain weaknesses of the demographic transition model? A great answer would be the model was developed to measure the development of a whole country demographically. And that's what the model was for. The model was not really developed to show economic development. Demographic transition is what we call a liberal model, which means you're supposed to move forward. There's no guarantee that happens, or that's one of the expectations. There's another criticism. Not all countries, they may get stuck because of whatever that happens in the world. An assumption was they don't move backwards. We've talked about scenarios in class where that might possibly happen. But I think a better criticism is the model was made to show a whole country. What's going on in regions of that country? Was Appalachia, that our grandparents, some of us lived in 50 years ago, really in stage 3? I don't think so. Okay, so that's another good criticism. Another great criticism is the model was designed based on Europe, and many places have not followed Europe's development. Okay, and absolutely to better complete that loop, Krista mentions bringing in parts of a country develop at different rates, and that's because of natural resources, it's because of geography, it's because of transportation infrastructure. You saw that word a lot lately, I think, FRQs. Infrastructure, remember, is like foundation. So a good infrastructure means you have good airports. It means you have transportation anyway, transportation infrastructure. You have good airports, you have good roads, you have good public transportation. That's a infrastructure when it comes to that, right? And again, it was based on Europe. Remember, a lot of Africa hasn't even seen much industrial revolution happen. So that's not what kicked them into stage 2, which the model originally said would have taken place. And absolutely, Krista's right about culture. Ethnic groups, ethnic minorities who reject the growth of their country and the way it's going, they may try to put up barriers and totally do things differently inside of that country, which causes major change. Okay? So great discussion there of how things kind of come together here. Let me run through some other major talking points. I knew this one was going to take probably close to an hour to get through even the talking points, but the next one doesn't start to 4 o'clock, so I think we're good for some break. Let me run through the others here. These are mainly have to do, don't forget Malthus, I mentioned him earlier, but don't forget to review him, population policy, pyramids, demographic transitions, Alinsky and Ravenstein, and all the connection. By the way, I did think of something that would be I don't know if it's too easy to think it would be mentioned on the exam and focus this year, or maybe not, but epidemiology. The epidemiological transition model. Omron's the guy who came up with it. Remember the stages 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then there was, this potential stage 5. Well, again, with all that's been going on, I don't know if they would be that design it in that way or not. But remember, stage 1, major pandemics, epidemics that would wipe out big portions of populations. Stage 2 being receding pandemics. Stage 3 being where basically the whole pandemic thing was controlled better. So degenerative diseases and human created ones like cancer and heart disease start killing people in their 60s and maybe even 70s. And then by stage 4, delayed degenerative and heart disease and cancer and that kind of stuff. So you live a little longer, but still the same things basically kill. And then at stage 5 is just hypothetical. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of theories about stage 5 after all this, but we'll see. But again, epidemiology is something to consider. Anissa mentioned something too, going back to our discussion about the stages, that acculturation can help to bring areas higher up the demographic transition model. And well, I would definitely say you can have resistance. Like a culture may totally resist and kind of say, no, we don't want any part of it, but they can also If they decide they do want to take part in kind of the growing of the economy and the way the trend is going, then you definitely will see acculturation and eventually assimilation, which matter of fact, those are on my list right here beside of me to talk about in the next session today. So we're doing good as far as getting some of these things in even early. All right, so I've already mentioned Malthus, so I'm actually further down my list than I thought I was. I'm basically down to 2 lines here of information regarding migration. Make sure you review push and pull factors, and make sure you think about consequences and causes of population migration or immigration. It wouldn't hurt to have a history of American immigration chart by your desk or somewhere you can flip through. Maybe one note card about, oh, these people came here, these people came here, these people came here. Knowing kind of the time period and where old immigrants, new immigrants. Old immigrants were early mid 1800s from Northwestern Europe. New immigrants, 1890s, 19 teens, through that era. Then the dead period. And then after World War II, 1940s, 50s, Asian and Latin American immigrants are the main ones to the U.S. But I don't think you're going to, again, be identifying those. I think you're going to be asking questions about why'd they come? Or because immigrants from these countries showed up, how did that affect culture? How did people react? If people, like that one FRQ you had on AP Classroom, if people ended up living in a ghetto, what does that tell us about the way those people were likely treated? Because ethnic groups and cultural groups that are treated more openly typically more mingle within society. You can see that in a lot of countries around the world. Now, the chicken or the egg kind of thing here does come into play. In some cases, chain migration, great review, creates a ghetto in itself. And that may cause more antagonism between the immigrants and the country they're going into. Sometimes that creates it. That actually does happen. But on the other case, what does happen is that those immigrants go into a ghetto or former ghetto area because of fear and concern. Everybody's uncomfortable with each other, and so they do it for that reason. But think about the reasons these things are done, and think about the consequences they bring. And think about its relationship to demographic transition and Zelensky. Kimber asked, are the countries and cultures resisting the demographic transition model or the growth, development in the demographic transition model, doing so to try to resist globalization and in turn placelessness? I think it's a very complex answer to that question. There is definitely, we've talked about this in class, there is a number of groups of people around our world today, they're in every country on the face of the earth, that are fearful of globalization. And to be honest with you, I think if we all were honest, all of us are at least a little fearful of globalization, but some are much more fearful of globalization. And so, yes, I do think some resistance of doing what everybody else does and allowing immigrants or increasing the amount of immigrants, I think that does partially come from an anti-globalization stance. But I do think it can be much more complicated than that. I think that, and you got to think about this too. What if you are a country you're not having a lot of kids? Okay, that's your demographic makeup. You got a lot of older people, a high elderly dependency ratio. Maybe your elderly dependency ratio is 40% or 0.4, which means for every 100 workers in the country, there are 40 people over the age of 65. See, we've not even included the youth in that number, which is probably really low. But if you're looking at that and you're seeing your culture generally dying out, that is going to cause some panic and fear in a lot of these people. And remember that a lot of these people, since if it is an elderly population, are going to be older, more traditional in their beliefs, they're going to probably be even more scared of what's going on with globalization, increased immigration, stuff like that. So it is a very complex situation. A lot of people take the easy way out, and this is just because I think you need to know this in general. A lot of people take the easy way out in saying that, anti-globalists are, uneducated and just, terrible people and even worse name calling. That is way, way too easy of a cop-out to explain this issue. And on the other side, those who claim globalists are out to, dominate the world and create some, phenomenon that they want political purposes of an elite and all that. That too is way too simple and way too kind of fanatical in that way. There's a complexity of issues that go on to why countries or people in countries may resist development or may resist immigration or want to, and may have opinions about culture groups. And history plays a role too, right? History plays a role as well. Placelessness is definitely a part of it. If you forgot that term, it is very important. Remember, a place has to do with unique properties at a location. If you become placeless, that means everything starts looking the same. Nothing made the world become more placeless, really, than the Industrial Revolution. Because the Industrial Revolution was the epitome of that. Mass producing products that all look the same. Compare that to housing styles of the popular brand versus the folk ones. Look what happened in the suburbs. Look what suburban America looks like. Look what any of our pop culture looks like for that matter, and you see the results of that. So we're leaking a lot into culture, but that's fine because there's a lot to cover there too, right? And then Krista brings up at the extreme levels of where there is a radical rebellion against whatever a country or they think the world is doing. Some situations have even led to ethnic cleansing. The fear of too much blending or the fear of losing power has led to a group of people being forcibly removed. Great segue. So Krista brings it up, so I'm going to go ahead and take the chance. Great segue. Ethnic cleansing comes hand in hand with, or a consequence of ethnic cleansing is refugee issues. Make sure, again, I don't know about top 5, but it's pretty close. I think pyramids and refugees are at least top 10 possible topics on an FRQ. What causes people to be refugees? If you're given a map of Syria, see, I could see that happening. If you're given a map of Syria, you're given a map of probably not Yemen, because Yemen has more IDPs because they don't leave the country because they're kind of trapped. But talk about what creates a refugee. Not money. It has nothing to do with economics, but it has to do with fear. It has to do with danger. And they're usually going somewhere just to get refuge, just to be safe for the now. And it's usually the closest country nearby. You need to know the challenges too it brings to that host country. You cannot just say, and the positives, okay, and the positives. You cannot just say it's more workers to compete for jobs. That's too generic. You must say it brings in a lot of people who need jobs, but many of them are going to be in line for the lower paying jobs, which therefore might lower the wages of lower skilled jobs in that country. Or you might say that's more dependence the government has to provide goods and stuff for, and therefore they need more tax base to be able to provide that. On the positive level, in the case of a place like Syria, there was also some brain drain during refugee. That's unusual. But if your neighborhood was getting bombed, a lot of people left. So there were some people who were very educated. And in that case, that brings some people who can be a bigger boost to some countries' economies as they often move into. So think about let me repeat, ESPN or SPEED. That's the two acronyms that help you with factors on a lot of questions. SPEED stands for social, political, economic, environmental, and demographic factors. ESPN, economic, social, political, and then the N is environmental is what they use it by, since it sounds like an N. But they don't have demographic in that one. So I think SPEED actually works better. Sometimes you can get a point itself just by mentioning, well, one factor is a political factor. On this year's test, you're not going to be able to do that. But you do need to say a political factor or a political consequence of a refugee crisis would be the host government has got to figure out how to appropriate funds, find funds to be able to help secure, protect, feed the people who are coming into their country, and possibly police possible issues between the refugees and those people who live in their country. I mean, it's one of those terrible situations where the refugees don't want to be there, and the people in the country they go to probably don't want them to be there either. And so that if things are not handled, and there's not a great way to handle it, I don't think, But if things are not handled with some, some careful nature, there's some big problems. And think about diseases and stuff like that, and how they could break out in lack of health care in these refugee camps. And they could give you a map of any modern history refugee situation, and you could have to talk about what caused it or what kind of issues it's led to, that kind of thing. Okay. And yeah, thank you, Lauren, for putting that up there. I know I tried to not talk too fast, but I know as far as writing that down, that might have been challenging. So, consequences of refugees, causes of refugees. And let's see what else I've got left. I would review, there's some, if you'll remember, there are some great interactive migration maps in Schoology under demography. Review those. I think they will stimulate your brain to be thinking about movements. And since this isn't about memorization, I think today is very much about stimulating your brain to the most possible kind of questions and topics you're going to see. Not everything, but try to focus on the big stuff. Try to focus on, well, why in the world is Australia getting a lot of immigration from Indonesia? Well, I mean, there's some obvious reasons to that, but there's also some demographic reasons, and there's also some stage level reasons that go with that too. So I kind of thought that on this one, it would take me till about 3 o'clock, about 45 minutes to get just through the content. And I'm sure I know there's some things that I've left out, but I think these are the most highly likely. Krista mentions distance, and of course, one conflict between moving to Australia probably culture, but these are the things that are most highly likely to be found on the test. I'll stop the recording here in just a second, and then any questions that you guys have, whether it's in the chat, whether it's if you want to speak up and ask a question, a follow up. I tend to think that one FRQ will be kind of, I want to say halfway. I don't know if that makes sense, since you're going to have 2 FRQs. I think one of them is going to be either half or more demographics, and then maybe the other half is going to be about agriculture. Maybe it's about culture. Could be either one. And so they're going to try to mend that together. So maybe an A, B, and C about population, or maybe A, B, C, and D. And I could see population pyramids and demographic transition. I could see a chart. I could see a graph. I could see a table. I could see a pie chart. I could see all kind of different things relating to this. All right, so let me stop this.